Haven't had the opportunity to do one of these videos in quite some time. It's about 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm in the middle of my drive from Pennsylvania back to Nebraska. I'm about halfway. I think I got about 6 more hours. Let me see. I think I had about another 600 miles to go driving cross country. But what I did want to talk about was the topic of the town, SVB, right? The bank that failed. And the bank really didn't fail. Bank just didn't have enough money on hand to meet what depositors wanted. None of that really matters. There's a lot of people talking about should I pull my money out? Is it safe to keep my money in the bank? And it is. It's safe to keep your money in the bank because the Federal Reserve will just print the money. What is more concerning is the inflation that will come as a result of what Joe Biden and Janet Yellen said. Now, a lot of people haven't really heard anybody cover what Joe Biden had said, which basically was because SVB bought bonds that were, let's say, like 1%, right? They were like 1% bonds. And because the Federal Reserve is raising interest rates, and you can buy, let's say, 2% or 3% bonds on the market currently, the bonds that the bank are holding are not worth as much on the open market as the bonds that are currently on the market, right? The 2% and the 3% bonds. And so they had tried to take out a loan because depositors were asking for their money. Depositors were asking for their money, and that money was invested in long-term bonds. And so they tried to get a loan, but that they couldn't get a loan because they had X amount of treasuries on their balance sheet. And the people who were going to offer them a loan were like, well, your treasuries on the open market are not worth as much. And so that's what caused what they call a run on the banks, where people were like, oh, we want our money. And so they started doling out whatever cash that they had. And on top of that, they had to then sell the treasuries that they had on the open market, and they had to sell them for less because they were worth less than the treasuries that were on the open market that were offering a higher percentage rate, a higher yield. And so what Joe Biden said and what the Federal Reserve said is that we're going to come in and we're going to value those bonds as if they are full value. Meaning, let's say, for example, you have a house. That house can rent for $1,000. And the house across the street can rent for $2,000. Obviously, the houses won't fetch the same price because the yield that it returns are different, right? The rent is different. So you can get $2,000 for this house because it's better, it's up to date, whatever. By comparison to this house, it's only $1,000. And so the federal government comes in and says, don't worry about it. We'll make up the difference as if it is as good as the house that is for rent for $2,000. So the question is, if that is what the federal government is going to do with the assets, in quotes, that the bank has that it is using for collateral for a loan, then you, in essence, could have an asset that is worthless. And the federal government will view it as if it is full value. And that is a wow for anybody who holds dollars, because that is a much bigger topic for discussion than whether or not the government is bailing out. See, the bailouts don't matter. As long as people's perception is that the dollar is of value, then all the banks could fail and the government will just bail them out, and it won't matter. Because the government, the banks have already failed for the people over 100 years ago. Back in the 30s, when the government said that the average citizen could no longer exchange their dollar for the gold, which is what the dollar was originally backed by. The dollar, in essence, became valueless to the average American, because the only reason that you utilized the dollar was because of the gold in the bank, and that you had access to that gold, which was the real value. The dollar was just a shadow. Excuse me. The dollar was just a representative of that which was of real value, which was the dollar. And so when you no longer have access to that which is of real value, it would be like a man, taking, like what the government in essence did. It would be like a man taking a woman who was a prostitute and slept with hundreds of men, and then the government saying, well, she's equal to a virgin. That's basically what the government did in the eyes of the people. They took assets that could be deemed worthless and said, no, they are of value. That is a much greater topic for discussion that I really haven't heard anybody talking about. They're talking about bailouts. Are the government safe? Are the banks safe? Here we go with another bailout. And the bailouts are irrelevant as long as the people are willing to accept dollars. Because all it is a perception. It is a perception of value. It is not real value. It is a perception of value. And as long as they can shape your perception, then the dollar will have value. That's why, like, when you look at the actual stock of the SVB stock, you'll see the stock was like trending like this, higher and higher and higher over time. And then people realized, oh shit, this company, this bank has no money. And so you saw the stock immediately just go straight down. It wasn't that it didn't have value before. It had no value before. It was the people's perception changed. The people finally realized, oh shit, this bank is worthless. And so the investors who were holding the stock, when they realized that, they immediately sold, and there were no buyers. And that's why the stock plummeted like 80% over the course of several days. It was trading like at $300, and then I think when I looked at it the other day, it was trading like at $20. And it was because once the people realized that this was worthless, it wasn't that it wasn't worthless before. It was worthless before. It was just people realized now it was worthless. And so once the perception was over, so was the company, so was the stock. So as they say, the jig is up, right? So that's why Bill Ackman was on Twitter talking about how the Federal Reserve needs not only to make the bank hold, but also those who were depositors, right? Normally, the FDIC will only insure up to $250,000. But he has said even these people that had millions and millions of dollars in the bank, that they also need to be made whole. Instead of what normally would happen in a capitalistic society is that those people would just go bust for investing in the wrong bank, and for that bank investing in wrong assets. But because we live in this is what socialism is, right? And because we live in a socialistic society, the government can just create it. And so Bill Ackman was correct. People are like, well, why should these people be made whole if FDIC is only supposed to insure up to $250,000? And this sets a precedent for all other banks. And this is the point. It's the perception. The perception. Because if the government doesn't, then there'll be a run on all banks. And the jig is up. And the jig is up. Because there is no money in the bank. If everybody went to the bank and said, give me my money, every bank in America would be an SVB. Every single one of them, because they don't have your money. And so that's why Bill Ackman, who is I believe he's a member of the Federal Reserve in New York, that is why he said, and he advocated, and the Federal Reserve understood this, that the charade, right, the magic show needs to go on. The perception of the people and of those who utilize the dollar needs to be that the dollar still has value, that their dollars will be given back to them. The dollars are of no value in reality. It's only in perception that people have, that people are willing to trade their labor for dollars, because the dollar is just a unit of energy. It's just a measurement of people's labor. People utilize their vital force, they labor, and in exchange they get a dollar. Even if those dollars were to disappear, they would still, the dollars that exist would then absorb that value, that energy, right? Because they would go up in value because now there are less dollars. So the existing dollars that are in circulation would then increase in value. Even though these dollars over here were destroyed, the other dollars that are remaining would go up in value because now there are fewer of them. And so that's why the government has to bail out everybody. The government has to bail out everybody. And those dollars that disappeared from the bank, they went somewhere. They went in somebody's pocket, right? So some of it went into the CEO, some of it went into investors, some of it went into shit. There were people literally the last minute that worked for the company that, I thought I saw somebody walk behind me. There were people that were last minute that were getting bonuses that worked for the bank. Like literally hours before the bank went under. And this is why it's important for people who are like, oh, you need to take your dollars out of the bank. It's irrelevant if you had your dollars out of the bank. Because the moment, just look at the ticker symbol, right? Just look at the ticker symbol for SVB. The moment people realized that the company was worthless, it literally just went straight down. That's why you see a lot of these pump and dumps, or like Doge. If you remember Doge was like $1, and then in a matter of a day or two, it was literally worth nothing. And that's exactly what would happen to the dollar once the people realize, generally speaking, that these things are worthless. The dollar will go from having value to having no value. It would literally go straight down. And by the time the average person realized it, it would be too late. Just like the average depositor in SVB, by the time they realized it was already too late. The money was already gone. Whatever was there was already pulled out, and what was left was seized by the government. And that's exactly what would happen to the actual dollar. The moment countries and people are like, we don't want to do business in the dollar anymore, or they realize we don't have to, the dollar would just go straight down. So it wouldn't matter if you were holding dollars in your pocket, under your bed, in the safe, because the moment people realized all these banks don't hold currency, they don't hold my dollars, and in fact the dollar has been worthless since the 1930s, when the government and the average citizen was no longer able to get gold for the dollar. And for most countries in 1970, when the country took the dollar off of the gold standard, and then countries, right, this is exactly what happened in 1970. I think it was in 71, where France was sitting here, the president of France was like, you know what? I see you guys spending money on this war. I see you guys spending money on all these social programs. I really don't think you have all that gold in your bank, and I want my gold. So he said, here, take your dollar back, give me my gold. And then all the other countries, just like what happened to SVB, when I forgot who it was that had talked about it. But once all the other countries were like, oh shit, I want my gold too, then the government said, sorry, nobody can get their gold. And at that point, the dollar was completely worthless to everybody. But because America was able to finagle other things going on, right, the petrodollar, the dollar remained relevant as a world global reserve. But it's been worthless, at least to the average citizen, since the 1930s. It's been like almost 100 years that the dollar has been worthless to the average citizen, but yet it still exists because it only exists here. The dollar only has value because of people's perception, the matrix, right? Because in the mind of the people, you don't even have to labor, right? You don't even have to labor for dollars in America. You can create a business in America and you don't even have to charge dollars. You can charge them whatever you want. You can take payment right? That's why there are companies that's why like Elon Musk could say, we'll take Doge, right? That's why there were other companies like Mark Cuban who was like, oh, we'll take, other forms of Bitcoin or other forms of cryptocurrency, because the government does not require you to take payment in dollars. It requires you to pay taxes in dollars, right? So that's why, for example, I could have an apartment that I wanted to rent, and I could say to a young woman, I'll rent that apartment to you for sex. The government will say, that's fine, but you got to pay taxes on that service. And I'd be like, what do you mean I got to pay taxes on that service? What is that service worth? And the government will say, well, what is that apartment worth in dollars on the market, right? That apartment, say it's a one-bedroom apartment. That one-bedroom apartment on the market in terms of dollars, what is equivalent to $1,200, right? So you got to pay taxes on that $1,200. So every time you make that transaction, rent for sex, you owe us taxes in dollars. That's the only reason why people labor for dollars. It's because they have to pay taxes in dollars. And if people understood that they didn't have to take payment in dollars, that's why there was that football player, I forgot his name, that he took his contract in Bitcoin. Because you don't have to labor for dollars. You can labor for whatever payment, for whatever form of payment that you want to take. But at the end of the day, the government will require you to pay taxes in dollars. Anyway, going to take a nap for a little bit and then head on to Nebraska. We're driving out to Nebraska. Still got another 6 hours. It's been a good 10 days off. Got to see my family. Had a bunch of other stuff. I was looking at property. I put in a bid for a property, so we'll see how that goes. But anyway, for people worrying about should I keep my money in the bank, it's irrelevant. Because the banks failed in the 30s and the banks failed again in the 70s. And yet here we are. The only reason is once the world moves on, then you really have to worry. And by that point, it'll be irrelevant. It will not matter if you have your dollars in your hand, in your wallet, in a safe. Because when it comes time for the dollar to disappear, it'll go like that. It'll go, what was it like the Bible says? Like the earth and everything in it will be consumed in fire, and like a hissing noise, it'll disappear. That's exactly how the dollar will disappear. You will not have time. Just like all those people in SVB. The moment they realized it, it was already too late. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.